revolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello, everyone. Here we are. It's the Functional Forum. So glad to be with you here for this amazing moment in the world. This is 2025, the year of transformation. And we're going to be talking about how we got here, the year of unity, and we're going to be talking about what this transformation looks like. If you've been familiar with the first Functional Forum of the year, we've typically had sort of a big name on the forum, Patrick Hanaway or an Andrew Weil, to talk about the state of the year. But this year, we're going to do something very different. It's just going to be me today, and hopefully we get an idea of why that is. Now, as normal, we are going to be taking questions live on X. So if you use hashtag Functional Forum, I'll be looking for questions later. It's just me today. And to be honest with you, when I've done this before, like when the other person is speaking, I have a bit of time to go and look for questions. So hopefully there'll be no loss of there'll be no dead air, but we'll try and do the best we can with that. So if you have questions, you can go to X and put those in, and we'll be answering questions at the end. All right, so typically at this stage, we typically show this map, and this is like the growing number of Functional Forum communities that we built over the last 5 years. But if you've been watching my email and reading it, you know that we started the year last Wednesday by announcing a pretty big shift in the way that we're thinking about Functional Forum communities. And it's not to say that this didn't work, it's just that we feel like ultimately we've spent 10 years trying to bring practitioners together, and there was a ton of momentum 2015 to 2018. It was really exciting. It was very disorganized by its very nature. It was decentralized. Anyone could start a meetup and they could just tell us if they were doing a meetup. Some people never told us they were doing a meetup, but we had them all over the world. And one of my favorite memories of the Functional Forum is actually doing a forum live in New York and having a group of 50 doctors watching it from the Philippines, because it was 8 in the morning the next morning in the Philippines. So there's been some great moments. Live streaming has done a lot, and we've had a lot of fun doing that. But I just think, with the moving into the year of transformation, it was a time, maybe transformation is death and rebirth. And the rebirth is really like taking it to the people. I feel like we built whatever Coherence has built in all these cities that you see across here. It's time to take the medicine to the people. And with the, excitement happening, with the unity that has arisen over the last 2 months around some of the topics that we feel, very strongly about here, and we've advocated for 11 years here at the Functional Forum. And before that, we feel like it's time to take it to the next level. Having said that, we do want to support those communities that are continuing to grow and thrive. And one of those is St. Louis, Missouri. So Kristen Brokaw has run that group for longer than the Functional Forum has been around. And so on the 3rd of April, we'll be doing the Functional Forum on a Thursday, because that's when Kristen has her meeting, and we'll be live from St. Louis, Missouri. So mark your calendar for that. It's going to be a great show, incredible talent pool in St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm excited to go there. But this was the blog that I shared. And essentially the vision, and if you haven't read this, you can go to the blog and check it out. But the vision is really that, we want to take the coherence of what's been built in the Functional Forum and take it out to the people. And ultimately that means, making sure that everyone in your county knows that you exist. If your county is like my county, there are great functional medicine doctors. There's a functional medicine doctor in every little town around the country now, in part to what we've done here at the Evolution of Medicine, but part from the whole ecosystem really playing their role in it. But I still know that most people don't know that these options exist. They don't know that their chronic disease might be reversible. And so that's why it's important now to go and make those connections out in the community. And also we see that in order for a functional forum doctor who's working inside a inside a food desert doesn't stand that much of a chance, because you've really got to change the behavior of the people to start cooking and start taking care of themselves. And ultimately, if that's very difficult to do, it's not easy for functional and lifestyle integrated medicine to thrive. And so we have to connect the whole health ecosystem. And so in this blog, we talked about some of the ideas that we have to connect functional medicine clinics, the broader primary care ecosystem. Let's think about gyms. Let's think about yoga studios. Let's think about chiropractors and integrated practitioners of all varieties, and bringing them together with the general public, with the organic food web, and with CSA boxes, and with maybe here in California, homeschooling resources, or working, seeing where there are school options that are genuinely healthy and driving the kind of healthy children that we want to see. And so we are not just going to be talking about that, we are going to be modeling that. And I'm super excited to go to Tennessee. Dr. Michael Mabry, who a year ago we featured, he started a new functional forum meetup. It's absolutely thrived. They had 90 practitioners at the first event in Johnson City, Tennessee, and it grew since then. They are putting on Healthy Tennessee and modeling what it looks to bring together 250 organizations that are all invested in trying to get people healthy and try and make a dent in Tennessee, which is the 48th healthiest state. So I'll be speaking at that event, and that'll be one great model. And that event is really for the sort of organizations themselves. The event that I'm going to be putting on April 5th in El Dorado County, California, is for the general public. And we are modeling how we're putting this together in a group that used to be called Functional Forum Meetup Hosts. It's a Facebook group. Now it's called Your Healthy County Leaders. And we have over 1,100 people in that group. And everyone in that group at one point or another has said, hey, I want to lead change in my community. And so we're going to be we already are showing our working, how we're thinking about putting the event together, how we're getting bums on seats, how we're, working with sponsors and that kind of stuff. So if this speaks to you and you're interested, go to that group, and you will learn. And ideally, the goal is that you're putting one of these on in your county later this year. This is really part of what I think is a local strategy. There's a lot of momentum in the country right now, because if you go back to when we started the Functional Forum, you see that there was really functional medicine clinics in the large cities and the sort of like hippie outposts. So Ashland, Oregon, and Asheville, North Carolina. If you look at like where the organizations were that were at the forefront of this movement, they were in some of those cities. But now, the push for health is coming from the red side of the aisle. And actually, now I'm going to show you there's some unity on this. And so ultimately, the good news is that it's right in the national consciousness in a way that has never been before. And just to prove this, was a highlight this weekend. This came out this weekend, where Gavin Newsom, who is my ex next door neighbor, and if you've been watching the Functional Forum for a long time, you know that I used to do it in a shed, and I live right next to Gavin Newsom in Fair Oaks, California. But he aims to limit unhealthy food in California, getting ahead of Trump administration RFK. So you see, pressure was put on Gavin Newsom to be ahead of the curve, because California likes to be ahead of the curve on all things healthy. And ultimately, you can see that he is asking for information about the state of school lunches in particular. The interesting thing is that he is asking for a report by the end of March, and my event is April 5th. So it's pretty exciting timing to see that. But this is what happens. You put a little bit of pressure on from the other side, and you see that actually everyone is incentivized. It is a populist position. It's good for the people to be healthy, and it's cool to see this being pushed to the forefront. And so excited to see what happens in California, and excited to see what happens all across the country. So I hope you'll join me and you'll feel inspired to, take it to the next level, which is not just bringing the practitioners together, but to bring the people to the practitioners. So the year of transformation. Now, the question is this just James who thinks this is the year of transformation, or is there anything else brewing? And I would say from every angle, no matter, where you get your information, or, what sort of community you're part of, a lot of other people are thinking that this is going to be the year of transformation too. A friend of mine posted this on social media this week, and saying like 2025 is the year of major change. And in this, way of seeing the world, we're coming out of the Kali Yuga and we're going into Dwapara Yuga, and essentially this is like the beginning of the sort of ascending cycle in this thesis. I know that in Jewish prophecies, They talk about the Star of Jacob, a comet that appears as a sign. There's the Christian end times. There's Nostradamus talked about 2025. There's Islamic prophecies. There's all kinds of geopolitical events happening right now. And ultimately, I believe that 2025 could be an incredible accelerant to the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. And, that phrase and book of the same name by Charles Eisenstein, was a very big inspiration early on in the Functional Forum. I had an event in 2016 where I put him on stage in front of leaders of our community. And it was just like, when I heard him speak, I was like, this is it. This is what we're doing. And, I think in all of these realms, the transition won't be easy, but it'll be significant. It has the potential to be a lot more significant. I think if you've been in the functional medicine space for the last 10 years, you probably think like this should be the standard of care. How is not the standard of care? And what I want to do today is to line out why I think it hasn't got there and what we can do next. So just in the context of the Functional Forum and the evolution of medicine, just what we've done here for the last 11 years, what would be a signal that the year of transformation was upon us, that something dramatically different from what's come before had happened? Well, it could be that Robert F. Kennedy becomes Robert F. Kennedy Jr. becomes the head of Health and Human Services. And just this weekend, they're talking about maybe he has the votes already to become Health and Human Services. I don't know if you're paying attention. You'll see in the intro, alongside Mark Hyman and Dr. Chatterjee and all the other awesome guests that we've had on the forum over the years, there he is, Bobby Kennedy, because we did a functional forum with him in 2016. And so ultimately, like, that could be a signal. But what if there was a signal that said, like, hey, James's ideas and the ideas of the Functional Forum and the work of the Functional Forum and the work of the functional medicine practitioners out there could be recognized as not just something weird, but something that's the future? What could that be? Well, if I was invited to speak about new models for the future of care by the WHO, would that be a signal? Well, that happened. So on October the 6th, I got an email to speak at a conference in Greece put on by the WHO European region and the Meeting of the Minds. And it was called, this is the title that they came up for me, was called The Evolution of Medicine, New Tools for More Effective Public Health Prevention Policies. And when I saw that, I realized like someone is paying attention enough to think that I have good ideas and to give me the name of a talk that I might give for myself. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to share some of that presentation because ultimately I would love for all of you to see what I've come up with, and I'll be making some interspersions along the way to contextualize some of what we're hearing. But let's just get into it. So first and foremost, this is my origin story. It's 2003. I'm doing health economics and I'm in the UK. And we're basically in this part of the trend, which is essentially like an exponential increase in the cost of the NHS. And ultimately, there's another graph that I was looking at the time, which sort of trends this line out over, let's say, the next 50 years. And you see that in around 2025, 2030, the amount of money spent on the NHS gets so astronomical that it kills the whole country. And it's not far off to what's happened today, right? If you look at what's happening in the NHS right now with doctors leaving and there is something significant that is going wrong in the UK, and we're starting to see it here in the US too, where the cost of chronic disease gets higher and higher and higher. There's been a lot of conversation about this with regard to Ozempic because it's so expensive. If everyone who could take Ozempic took Ozempic, it bankrupts us straight away. So you see that the problem here, one, is chronic disease. And second, it's taking up a bigger and bigger part of the budget. So in 1955, the NHS takes up 11% of the budget. In 2015, it takes up 30%. If it gets to 50 or 60%, there's no money to do anything else apart from keep the population healthy. And it's not even keeping the population healthy. So this is the beginning of my journey. And this is when I saw that in my lifetime, this would happen. And it's not when I'm like on my deathbed, it's when I'm having kids. And this is right now, it's 2025 and it's happening. So that's why 20 years ago came into the space to try and understand what was going on. And I put this graph in because in a certain way, I was going to Greece. And Greece actually has, pretty good life expectancy outcomes. Only 10% of the food that's eaten in Greece is of is processed. And if you've been to Greece, if you've been to Italy, if you've been to Spain, you know that. That's why you feel great when you go there, because it's, the food is so fresh. So I was kind of going to ask the group there, like, why do you want James here from America? Because look, America is not doing so well, and you've probably seen this graph. Now, as an economist, this graph really speaks to me, because when I see it, I see diminishing marginal returns. And you can see that essentially in about 1980, we start to veer off from the rest of the world and take a hard right. And, through everything that I've heard and all the time, even just speaking to my mother-in-law the other night, it's like really in the early 80s is where healthcare started to get really acute focused and really pharmaceutical focused. And so I was thinking about this. Now, I'm preparing to do my talk at the WHO. I'm in South Africa with my father, and most of you know the story about my father. He had a major cognitive decline. I went to go and see him on the way, and I get a message to say that my section of the conference has been cancelled, and therefore that I'm not going to be able to do this talk. And ultimately that day I was feeling like definitely frustrated, because I thought this is going to be a big moment. But I happened to be driving along and listening to my favorite podcast. And on the exact day that this came out, my favorite podcast is the Dark Horse podcast with Brian Weinstein and Heather Hying. They've been on the Functional Forum, or they've been on the Evolution of Medicine podcast before. But this section came up, and I want you all to listen to it, because I think when I heard this, I was like, this is exactly what has happened to America. So let's listen to this.
A giant R1 university, in terms of the diversity of kinds of questions that were being asked, and asked well, and asked with rigor.
So I want to introduce one sort of structural element for thinking about what's happened to science. People are going to be able to see it. I guess they can see it. This is a diminishing returns curve. I'm going to argue, I have argued, that a diminishing returns curve is automatically the product of any complex system in which there is an objective, an identifiable objective. And so the reason I'm raising it here is that this school of thought thing ends up interfacing with this feature of the natural world in a very counterproductive way. So if you imagine that this chart actually is describing so ROI over here, return on investment, and this is the amount of investment. So as the investment goes up, the return on each unit of investment levels off. You get a BART. I cannot do this back.
Well, just to contextualize here, let's say the ROI is life expectancy, because that was what was on that graph before. Everyone's aiming, every country is looking to increase their life expectancy, and the investment is what we spend in healthcare dollars to get there. So although that's not like explicitly the aim of healthcare, it pretty much aligns with it perfectly. Whoops. Okay, here we go.
There is an objective, an identifiable objective. And so the reason I'm raising it here is that this school of thought thing ends up interfacing with this feature of the natural world in a very counterproductive way. So if you imagine that this chart actually is describing so ROI over here, return on investment, and this is the amount of investment. So as the investment goes up, the return on each unit of investment levels off. You get a BART. I cannot do this back. You get this bargain phase. That steep face is a bargain, right? That bargain peters out, and it becomes incredibly expensive to make even the next little incremental improvement. And actually, I will point out that each school of thought is going to follow this graph. And the problem is that bargain phase, this phase here, the bargain phase, is so compelling. So the school of thought discovers something novel that unleashes a wave of further discoveries, right? Some new way of looking at something, some technique that allows you to look into genes or whatever it is. And you get this huge burst of productivity. And my claim is that burst of productivity convinces everybody that this school of thought is the answer, because it's producing useful product at such a high rate. And what happens
Convinces people.
Okay, so just to stop for a second here. So in my mind, this is allopathy, right? This is the, let's say, pathogenesis, right? Where we can identify a pathogen, or we can identify a cause, and we can treat the cause with a pharmaceutical. So you think about the Flexner report, starts in 1913. You get this incredible increase in the first half of the 20th century in life expectancy. And that increase in life expectancy is based on a number of things. And it's not, exactly clear, but you can certainly see you have the growth of drugs, you have incredible, improvements in nutrition, you have incredible improvements in sanitation, but mainly allopathic medicine takes credit for this. So that's what's happening here.
Here, that the slope is going to do that.
Right. And so they kill off all the other schools of thought, which aren't paying back in this way because.
So that's a key point. So I think when I've showed this to other practitioners, or I played it to them, killing off the other schools of thought. I mean, look, in the 1850s, you have all of these different schools of thought. You have the homeopaths, you have the eclectics, you have all of these different ways of doing things. But to describe natural medicine, functional medicine, alternative medicine, whatever you want to call it, and describe it as being killed off is a reasonable approximation of what happens in those years, right? You have the closing of all the homeopathic hospitals. You have the organization of medical schools so that it's only just being done one way. And, I would say that and it was only really in the 1960s that you see something else starting to emerge. And you see the beginning of the natural medicine movement, herbalism, all those things effectively killed off by the dominant paradigm of allopathy.
They haven't just discovered something new. And the problem is that then you get stuck here. And the natural thing to do would be to realize, well, we are on the plateau phase of the diminishing returns curve. And what's the right thing to do? The right thing to do is to actually boot up the next best school of thought.
The next best school of thought. Now, you could argue that it's been the best school of thought all along, but this is the key frustration of anyone that's in our space, is that it's so obvious to all of us who are doing this work and practitioners who are doing lifestyle-focused root cause approach, that if you could only unleash the power of our medicine, you could actually have that next bump. And let's carry on.
And then you get this pattern, which actually, this is a graph that should be everywhere. The only place, or maybe there's one other place where it shows up for unrelated reasons, but each of these schools of thought can produce another wave of improved understanding. But the problem is the people in this school of thought have an economic reason not to want that next school of thought booted up.
Does that sound familiar? An economic reason not to have that next school of thought booted up. I would also argue that the reason why all the European countries and other countries have continued to go up while America's gone this way is because they do honor more of what actually happened before, because they didn't have a Flexner report. They're aware of the fact that the majority of the benefits, came from nutrition and sanitation and so forth. So they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they're actually, getting the benefit of those tools. And if anything, starting to come in our direction because of marketing.
So effectively, they become defenders. Oh, can you put that image up? That's us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why my copy of the book says not for distribution, but this is.
We're going to distribute it anyway.
This is from the final or the penultimate chapter of Hunter Gatherer's Guide, where we talk exactly about what you're talking about.
Right. So that stepwise progress is what we should be doing in science. But the way that we fund and support science produces this other counterproductive mode where something that was once promising peters out and is in a position to stifle any competition, where that competition would immediately embarrass it, right? So
immediately embarrass it. immediately embarrass it. I think those words speak true to our community, is that once you've started doing this medicine, you know that it would immediately embarrass it. If you're dealing with complex chronic illness, if you're dealing with autoimmune disease, if you're dealing with these different areas, it obviously is what would happen. And this, you see this. So there's a period of initial investment. Let's say this is the Flexner report. Then you get this big jump. You get the diminishing returns. You should go into this next phase, but we haven't done that. Now, this is why it's so exciting and why I've been, excited about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. becoming head of Health and Human Services, Jay Bhattacharya becoming head of the NIH. Because if you listen to the interviews about what they want to do, they want to unleash this productivity. They want to do science that shows that a health-focused way of doing healthcare gets these benefits that we're not getting because we're getting the diminishing marginal returns from ever more drugs, right? The first opiate saves the day on the battlefield of World War I and World War II, but now we have an opiate epidemic, right? The first few medications, the first antibiotics, they, create an incredible amount of value for keeping people alive. But then, now we have antibiotic resistance and we have people dying of antibiotic resistant strains in the hospital, right? This is exactly the example.
The holding on to this niche because you have the ability to make everything else, die of starvation is not science at all. It's anti-scientific. It's very human. It's very normal, competitive. But the idea that once you're on one of these diminishing returns plateaus, that what comes to you and sounds like science, and well, I went to the Science Institute and this is what the science people told me, it's got to be pretty good. It's cutting edge, right? And the answer is no, it's not cutting edge. What it's doing is killing all its competitors in their crib. So you're not seeing the things that it can't answer because it's learned how to keep them out of the conversation entirely.
All right, let's take a moment to breathe that in. Does that feel like truth to you? It certainly felt like truth to me. I'm driving along and I'm like, yes, yes, yes. This describes exactly what has happened. And ultimately, why I think the year of transformation is upon us is because I think we're about to unleash the power of lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, health, salutogenesis. That's where we're headed. And so what I want to do with the rest of my time here is share my thesis for that. These are the questions that I have asked myself over the last 20 years. When I arrived in 2005, when I knew that that chronic disease was going to drive future problems, the first question is chronic disease reversible? And within just a few months of working in a clinic, I saw that it was. Is it reversible and preventable at the scale that it exists? Well, that took another 15 years to work out because one, it was like, hey, there's not enough doctors doing this. Two, none of the doctors and practitioners speak the same language, so you can't build these practitioner teams. Three, behavior change and safety is at the cornerstone of all of these areas, and these aren't being addressed by one-on-one doctor appointments. And that became the community cure. And then can it be done in an economically viable way? This is what I want to talk about today. And ultimately, I want to pay homage to the naturopathic therapeutic order because of all the models that I've seen, this is it. This describes in both human and economic terms the best way to run healthcare. And it's you start with the least costly, least invasive interventions and work your way up. So you establish the foundation for optimal health, the social determinants of health. People in healthcare wouldn't argue with that. They know that you have to do the social determinants of health. That's why it's a buzzword. Then you have to stimulate the self-healing mechanisms. They don't talk a lot about this in allopathic medicine, but that could be sleep, but it could be tapping, it could be acupuncture, it could be, turning on the self-healing mechanisms. It could be things to do with the vagus nerve, which we spoke about a lot last year. Support and restore weakened systems. That is nutrition, clinical nutrition. That is what we do in functional medicine. Address physical alignment, chiropractic, old school osteopathy, physical therapy. Then natural symptom control, use of natural substances to palliate. This could be functional medicine. This could be supplements, right, in there. And then if and only if all of those have not worked to deal with your issue, synthetic symptom relief, drugs, and then high force intervention surgery. It's backwards. It's upside down, the way that we're doing it. So I want to share homage to the naturopathic therapeutic order. And I would say that, given a long enough time, medicine trends and arcs back towards nature. Given a long enough arc, it arcs back towards nature, because that is what health is. It's our connection to nature, it's our connection to each other, it's our connection to ourselves. And we've talked about that for 11 years on the Functional Forum. I remember we had I can't even remember the doctor who came in. He talked about all diseases being diseases of disconnection. That was like in the first year that we did the Functional Forum, and that's been a constant theme. So I want to share now my version of this. And this is an economist's point of view of how we get to what we need to do. And ultimately, what I want to show you here is this 5 C's. And you've probably seen this. This was the highlight, the conclusion of my book at the Community Cure. And there is some subtlety that I want to draw here, which is that the darker the color, the more it costs per patient, right? So changing culture could be very difficult and could cost a lot. But if you take it across the whole population, it's in a per patient per month, it's not that much. Community is slightly more, because you might have to have a health coach or a professional, or you might have it connected to the health system in some way. So it's slightly more than culture. Coaching is slightly more than that. Care itself is more than that. And then cost sharing for the most costly things that we buy in healthcare is the most expensive. Think about your accidents and your trauma and your, cancer and all that kind of stuff, right? So this is a subtlety, and this is the economic thesis that was at the end of my book, The Community Cure. And what I want to do now is I'm going to break it down like I would have done for the WHO, or I might still for the WHO if that conference comes around, which it might. So first, culture. How do we change? How do we create a healthy culture? And I do want to come back to, some of what we're going to be doing. So this Healthy Eldorado, it's about reinforcing, things that create a healthy culture. At the end of the day, truth and trust is important. This is why if you look at the results of the pandemic, you see that Sweden did really well for many reasons. But one of the things is they have a lot of trust in their doctors. They have a lot of trust in their medical system, and for good reason. They made trustworthy decisions in there. They, when the rest of the world zigged, they zagged, because they were like, hey, we know that in a pandemic, you don't lock up the healthy people. And that's why look at it this day, Sweden's outcomes way better than anywhere else in Europe. So you need truth and you need trust. I wanted to share this idea. Now, this is Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. Many of you guys know him. He hosted some functional forums at the Royal Society of Medicine in 2017. But this particular picture is of his TV show called Doctor in the House. And on his TV show, this obviously should be in America, and this could change the culture. If this came out on Netflix now, it would change the culture, because what it shows is people reversing their chronic illness. And what it does is it opens the Overton window of what we can actually discuss, because ultimately it shows people doing what not everyone thinks is possible. Not everyone knows that reversing a chronic illness is possible, but on this TV show in the first season, they started with easy things like type 2 diabetes. But by the second season, it was cluster headaches and autoimmune disease, and he resolved it all. And for that moment, for the 10 million Britons who watched that show, they were able to see that it was different, that it's possible to reverse a chronic illness and keep it reversed. And Dr. Chatterjee has become the #1 podcast in Europe and has had a big effect, taking advantage of, people who are putting out really good content could be a huge advantage in changing the culture. I would say that every country missed a trick by not focusing on this kind of content during the pandemic, right? It would have been the perfect time to say, hey, we've got to get our health in order, especially in America. We're dying of COVID in much greater proportion than anywhere else. And that's because of the depth of our chronic illness. Now is the time to turn it around. Was there one TV show that showed people getting healthy or working together in groups? There was not that I saw. And so this is the opportunity, is the creation of content. So if you're out there and you're making podcasts and you're doing doing this kind of stuff, good on you. Making books, doing summits, we got to get the word out there. And that's the way that we change the culture. But also, the culture can change locally. And you see this with efforts like the Blue Zones, where how do we change the culture in a community to facilitate that? In 2017, we did that event in Guernsey where we talked about doing that for a country of 65,000 people. So culture is the first C. The second C is community. And this has obviously been, what I've been about here, majoritively for the last, few years. I wrote this book, The Community Cure. Hopefully you guys have read it. You can download it for free. Shouting self-care at people who need community care is how we fail people. This is Nikita Valerio. It's one of my favorite quotes because it talks to the fact that, for the disempowered, it's very difficult for them to take on a lot of these new healthy behaviors because they're just not in a position where they can do that. That's why Jeff Geller was the hero of that book, because what he did was get people into groups and have them talk about what resources are available locally. Can they support each other in making these small changes and not having a curriculum, but supporting the people in front of them? That is community care. And health or disease is biopsychosocial in nature. And so much of the time we focus on the biological, metabolic disorders, neurochemistry, genetics, immune response. But what we need to focus is on this full biopsychosocial makeup of the patients, and that disease is biopsychosocial and health is biopsychosocial. And that's why included in all of these events, it's not just about the content that goes out. It's not just about getting connected to those groups. It's about rebuilding the social fabric. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing at Healthy El Dorado is something that I learned along the way from Froome in the UK, where they created a database of all of the communities that exist to cure loneliness, to solve loneliness. And so that's a big part of what we're going to be doing at Healthy El Dorado, where in one day, by having the people there, we're going to, create a list of hopefully hundreds and hundreds of different groups that people can join so that they can feel more connected to their community. All right, so just to give you some examples, and this again was an example that I was taking to my presentation, but just to showcase something from the data. So the BMJ, this is Dr. David Unwin, and I've talked about this a number of times over the last few years. I talked about it in my book, but this is essentially showing that by doing type 2 diabetes in groups in his practice over 5 years, half the people who had diabetes reversed their diabetes. By just doing chronic disease in a different way, by having the group be the focus of the delivery system and not the one-on-one. And that's why he did this. And the savings for that are so monumental. You can see here savings. This is just in diabetes drugs, but you know that if you're saving on diabetes drugs, you're also saving on everything else. The extra visits, the other medication, the polypharmacy, the diabetes medication, the medication for the mental health conditions that might go along with being diabetic or being obese. So, if you can reverse your type 2 diabetes, the cost goes down significantly. If you do groups and you do groups successfully, these are some of the benefits that you can expect at the individual level, the interpersonal level, the organization and community level. I've talked about this ad nauseam. This is why I believe that groups need to be the center of the future of care, and they need to be driving care, and they need to be driving the safety, the connection, the participation. And that ultimately, practitioners need to be on the edge. And there are some, very innovative clinics out there that are bringing this to the forefront. We featured some of them on the Functional Forum, and I feel you're only going to see more and more of this. And I'm going to try my damnedest to support it. But one of the reasons why, we haven't seen this scale is because, it's not easy to scale in-person groups because there's a lot of logistics. Car park, how do we, where are people going to park, how are they going to get there? And so I give this example of what we did a little bit at Heal Community to show that this can also be done virtually, because I wanted to speak to the ministers of education there, the ministers of health, who would see that you could do this in a scalable way with technology as well. Look at these numbers. Physical health, 95% of participants and 67% of mental, improve their physical health, 67% mental health. This should be the front of care. All right, coaching. So, we've spoken a lot about coaching. And by the way, with community, before we get onto coaching, I guess I just want to say that there are many different ways to deploy community. I've given you a couple of examples of group visits, but when I sit on stages, I was in Mexico at the Mexican Association of Lifestyle Medicine, and just talked about Dr. Joel Kahn, who I talked about in my book too, the plant-based nutrition support group, and just the direction to which one doctor in agreement with one patient who had a very specific issue, which is that there was no way that he could see that he was going to learn to cook and cook for himself consistently, spawned a 7,000 person, group of men in the Detroit area who were feeling similarly, who were lonely and needed connection and needed to transform the way that they were eating because they knew they were going to get a heart attack if they didn't. And ultimately, that community was able to happen very quickly. Look at the Daniel Plan and some of how that came together in churches with Dr. Amen and Dr. Hyman and the work they did there. There's plenty of different ways to execute on community. It's not just group visits, but group visits is something that I think can play a big role there. Let's talk about coaching. Been a big supporter of coaching almost all the way through the Functional Forum. I'm really pleased to say, honestly, that when I speak to functional medicine doctors today, most of the doctors that I speak to have a coach in their office, and that is in sharp contrast to where we started even 5 years ago. When we started in 2014, because my business partner Gabe was one of the first functional medicine coaches, he was a coach in a functional medicine doctor's office. We were sure from the first episode of the Functional Forum that coaching was going to be a part of getting the implementation. And ultimately, this is starting to catch on, talking about it in the New York Times. I love this quote from Brene Brown. One day you'll tell your story of how you overcame what you went through. It'll be someone else's survival guide. This is the biggest resource that we have, which is peer-to-peer delivery of value. We're using it at almost 0% of its potential. And so I'm super excited that, to continue to recommend coaching. And one of the other things I want to talk about is there has been a growth, and you heard from Julia Hotz last year, who wrote The Connection Cure. And that book talked really about the movement of social prescribing. And so in the UK, they're ahead of the game in social prescribing, and that is its own movement. And that really looks at, sort of this gap between physician and peer. And it could be a coach, could be a social prescriber. They have a lot of things in common. But I think major health systems are starting to realize that leveraging the people who have reversed a chronic illness in some way to support them is really valuable, and that's what we should be doing next. All right, care. Arguably, this is what we've focused on for the majority of the Functional Forum, and that's why it's called the Functional Forum, because we believe that care needed a different operating system. And I shared this in the email this week, and I wanted to just take a moment to unpack this. There is a consortium, a coalition of groups in our space: integrated medicine, functional medicine, lifestyle medicine, that come together. This was one of the things that came from that, really trying to just showcase what is the difference between a person going into the conventional system, right? So let's look at this. Version A, conventional. You get an organ-specific system diagnosis. You have multiple long-term medication, the polypharmacy. You have frequent interventions. You have no skills training or minimal skills training. And the outcome is accelerated aging, intensive support required. And you can see what that looks like. And that's the traditional pathway for people who get sick in conventional medicine today. Now let's look at whole person care. A biopsychosocial case history. Remember that word? Thinking about the psychosocial elements, the way that people are living, and so forth. Early component, non-drug interventions, skill training, health literacy, right? How do we create structures where we can actually train people to do healthy behaviors, get the health literacy levels up, and doing multi-component non-drug interventions? So that might look like a group visit. That might look like getting people into groups where they're doing healthy behaviors. This is healthy, active aging, maximize independence, and high well-being. Obviously, that sounds better. And what they're making the case for here is the big gap in cost between these two areas. And ultimately, I feel like the thing that's going to drive the transformation is the cost. I noticed it 20 years ago in my economics training, and it's here right now. But if every person costs $353,000, that's why it's going to cost, that's why this is unsustainable. And so much of the cost is made up at the end of life. And you can see that with that red line. So this is the sort of exact, when I saw this diagram, I was like, this is showcasing the power of delivering care in this way. And you can see here, I always use this graph because I love it. This is from 2015 from Nature, is just showing that if you look at the actual numbers, number needed to treat, you see that drugs don't work for most people most of the time. Humira, 1 in 4, that costs $5,000 a month. Crestor, 1 in 24. Nexium, 1 in 20. You see these numbers here. You see that the most popular drugs don't work for most of the people most of the time. And that's why we can't have drugs as the first round of care for chronic illness. We need to unleash the power of lifestyle focused root cause care. That's all there is to it. And the reason why I got into functional medicine at the beginning is because we need a cohesive story. We need a language, a common language that practitioners can learn to work together in teams. And early on, when I was looking at naturopathic doctors and chiropractors and acupuncturists and all of these different modalities of doctors, they were all doing great work, but they didn't speak the same language, which makes building a team very, very tricky. And so I think that, this is the best example that I've seen of a common language, and maybe new versions of this will appear that will make it easier to understand and easier to scale. But this is, some of the core value that I see in the functional medicine matrix. And 80,000 practitioners have taken training through IFM. If you look at A4M, they had 8,000 people at the annual conference this year in Vegas. And so, people are coming for longevity, but then they want to learn, okay, what do I actually do to reverse chronic illness? Because the thing that's going to stop you from living a long life is getting a chronic illness. So let's just talk about one example, because this is hot for me right now. And, if you know about what we talked about last month with Alzheimer's disease, I saw this being shared online by a doctor that I like. And this talks about the multi-factor theory for Alzheimer's disease. There could be no better example of the benefit, of the diminishing returns than drugs for Alzheimer's disease. I mean, we're literally not just, we're definitely flattened out, right? We haven't seen any success in it, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. Were we aiming at the wrong thing? The beta amyloid plaque. You can see this multi-factor theory of Alzheimer's disease shows there's 3 things. There's the cognitive impairment, there's the neurodegeneration, and there's the beta amyloid deposition. Now, what are the causes? Look at these causes: trauma, metabolic, toxic, deficiency, infection, inflammation. How do you deal with Alzheimer's effectively unless you're doing the functional medicine operating system? Even lifestyle medicine doesn't get into these causes. And if these are the things that are driving Alzheimer's disease, you need to have the functional medicine operating system. And this is why, for these kinds of conditions, multi-factor chronic conditions, you need a multi-factor way of thinking about it. And that's why we called it the Functional Forum. That's why we're still advocating for functional medicine all these years later. We think that this is the way. And, with regard to lifestyle, yes, there's been some great outcomes with lifestyle can make a big impact in Alzheimer's disease for sure. But sustaining that impact over the long term requires you to deal with the root causes. And that's why I'm really excited to be, working on this all day, every day. And this is why, we came together with Dr. Burke, with True Neuro last week. And we talked about in last month's forum, because we wanted to talk about the way in which we have to make this easier. And I was just on a call today with Dr. Burke and Dale Bredesen. And by the way, put the date in your calendar, Tuesday, March the 4th. We are going to have an epic 2-hour session in partnership with the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute, Dr. Jeff Bland, Dr. Dale Bredesen, Dr. Christine Burke, talking about what's new in Alzheimer's disease, what's working. And we're going to be talking about the study that Dr. Burke's involved in. And we're going to be showcasing some of the ways that we believe that we can use Alzheimer's as an example where the standard of care does not bring back the MoCA score, but functional medicine can and does. All right. And now the last one is cost sharing. Now, some of you guys know I created a medical cost sharing entity called New Health. And so I am very passionate about this topic, because I believe that, one thing that you see from just the last month in America is that most people don't like health insurance companies. They are too disconnected from the insurance companies. They are disconnected from from acting in a way that would support their own self-interest and the interest of their community. And one of the things that I noticed when I was part of a medical cost sharing community after I had the first baby, and I was part of Liberty Health Share for that many years, I consciously, was making a decision to be healthier because I wanted to, be supportive of the other people in the group. And I think we've just touched the very surface of the potential of that energy, which is that me being healthier reduces the cost for my brother, right? And me taking care of myself is better for the community. And me going out of my way to help other people in the community is better for the community and it's better for the costs. And I believe that this is something that in the next, the next era of what we're up to, we're going to spend some time talking about, because I think that that power to benefit financially from taking care of yourself and taking care of others is a force that we have to unleash if we are going to turn around health. So thank you very much. That's just one of the things that I'd be thinking of. And so we have to make sure the incentives align. We have to make sure that we are creating the right incentive structures to help people thrive. And ultimately, like one of the groups that I'm going down to Healthy Tennessee, they're in Dr. Mabry's group. They are a primary care group where they have value-based contracts. And so their incentive is to keep people healthy for the minimum possible cost. And, most countries of the world have value-based. It's only in America where you have fee for service that's like not the way that it is. Most places you're looking for value in healthcare. And so the incentives align to be healthy and stay healthy. We need transparency. I think there is the potential for really transparent tools to emerge where you can see exactly how the community resources are being used to take care of health. And I think that that was part of the vision for New Health, was really getting like complete transparency on the ways in which healthcare was created. And that will take decentralization. I think that you know, I I don't feel like if I had a United Health plan, I don't feel like I want to take care of my fellow man by not, using my health plan. But I think if it was decentralized and I was with a pool of people locally and we were all, transparently connected in our healthcare costs, that we would see healthy behavior flourish because of the financial incentives and the peer-to-peer incentives of doing healthy things consistently. So that is part of the vision. I don't exactly know how we're going to get there, but certainly, this is just part of what I wanted to share as part of my new tools for effective public health prevention policies. All right, well, that's it really for today. I am grateful to have had this opportunity to share. I hope this has been useful. I have talked about the diminishing marginal returns before, right in the beginning of COVID, because I see so much of it, because that is my area of training in economics. And I see, many of the different things that I've spoken about tonight. But it was really great to just see someone with the experience of trade-offs, Brett Weinstein in this case, talking about it so clearly. And as he was talking about it, I was just like, I think the people in my industry are going to resonate with this idea, because they see that effectively, this industry has not lived up to its potential because it has been stifled, it has been pushed down, and there is a moment in history that's happening in January of 2025 when this is being filmed, that there is a potential for an exponential increase in the power of lifestyle, the power of salutogenesis to transform healthcare. And it's up to all of us to fulfill that potential. So, some dates for your calendar. In February Functional Forum, we're going to be doing a PLMI preview. The PLMI this year is in June. I'm very excited about what's coming up there. We'll have some great live guests and you can ask some live questions. In March, so in February also, we're going to the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Aaron Brockovich is going to be speaking. I think it's going to be a great event. We'll be bringing our cameras there. If you're going to be there, come and say hello. And then on April 3rd, we'll be live from St. Louis ahead. We do want to continue to support those groups that have built amazing communities, because it is really powerful. Like the doctors in St. Louis are connected. There's coherence built between them. They refer to each other. The sort of like the ego is down and the connection is up. They're very, very connected group. I wish that for every city in the country. And that was the reason why we did the functional forum, why we started it. But ultimately, it'll be up to everyone to work together on that. So this has been the Functional Forum, and I'm really excited. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Let's look on Twitter to see if you have any questions. All right, Dr. Michael Mabry is watching. Doc, thanks so much for your support. I'm excited to be there at Healthy Tennessee. It's going to be really wonderful to see, what we can get done there. And yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in here tonight. This is the Functional Forum. I'm your host, James Maskell. This is the year of transformation. I hope you have a great year. If we can be of help, if we can be of helpful to you, if we can be of service, if you want to get in touch, and we help your practice shine in 2025, now is the time. Thank you so much.